Sunday, May 14th, 2023. Happy Mother's Day. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. I haven't been doing a lot of reading lately, and so I decided to try and catch up on my reading. This book is called Words. I don't know if you can see that cover or not, by Jean Paul-Sartre. And the cover of this particular version, the Penguin Classic, includes a quote from it, which I guess they figured was the most poignant or insightful, I'm not sure. I loathe my childhood and all that remains of it. Words by Jean Paul-Sartre. Not sure how to pronounce his last name. But anyway, so I just finished reading this, and as you may or may not know, Jean Paul-Sartre was a French intellectual who was known for the philosophical outlook called existentialism, and where we get the term existential angst and things like that. He was born in Paris in 1905, and he was from a, kind of an upper class. They use the term bourgeois, a term I don't like. It's just another term for snobby upper class people. And his dad died when he was young, so he was raised by his grandfather, who was some type of prominent lawyer, and his mother, who was a teacher or something. And so he was sent to all these prestigious private schools and tutors. And so he was very much nurtured in his education because he was seen as a child prodigy with regards to literature. So he read and wrote at a very early age and continued doing so throughout his life. The book is divided into two sections. The first section is called reading. So he details the things that he has written as a child. And then the second section is about writing. It details the things that he wrote as a child. Existentialism is just another fancy term for atheism, you could say, I would say. And the book itself is very depressing. It would be inspiring for somebody that wants to be a writer, because he details all his experiences as a child. And so it shows the net effect. He was an only child, and it shows the net effect of when somebody from a very early age is supported in a particular endeavor because of the impact that he had. He's still considered, a hero by the French. They probably have statues of him, and he's venerated, and on and on. But really, it's quite a depressing piece of literature. Now, I have earmarked it a lot, and I plan to probably go through it again one day and take down a number of notes which jumped out at me that I thought were worth going over again. But that being said, the essence of himself and his cohort that he spent a lot of time with in his life, a woman by the name of Simone de Beauvoir. You may have heard about her. She's also a famous existential philosopher, you could say. And they were both brought up Catholic. But because they were from well-to-do families with very weak roots in terms of faith, all they cared about was getting ahead, going to museums, enjoying the better things of life. You can imagine Paris in 1905. It was a very self-satisfied culture. And so his faith gradually deteriorated. And in the case of both of them, they eventually became atheists, proud of their atheism. And so it's something that you can learn, that the entire attitude of his writing. Now, he's writing this as an older gentleman, and he's writing about the memories he had as a child. And the summation of his impressions, this is a man who is extremely gifted in expressing himself through words, and he had also an amazing powers of observation through reading extensively and observing the world around him, of course, and through people, of course. But the net result of all his talents that he had, both observing and expressing, never caused him to reach a point of thankfulness. Zero. The experience that he had, this book is entirely self-centered, right? So every second sentence starts with I. I did this, I thought that, I felt that. And it's all navel-gazing. It's all childhood angst, existential angst, right? It's all about his inner thought life, and he's expressing it through words. But there is never any thankfulness. All there is this minute analysis of the realities of life, and he comes to the conclusion that life is absurd, that life doesn't make sense, that life is chaotic, that he cannot explain his reason for being on the earth, although he does have a very strong sense of purpose. And in fact, as he aged, as he got old, he eventually reached the point where he said, well, there must be a God because my life was so focused in one area of being a influential writer. So he said there must be a God, or there must be a force that controlled that, and that has to be God, which caused Simone de Beauvoir to have kittens, because she was so upset that he didn't remain a staunch atheist until he was dead. And as you know, Simone de Beauvoir was an ardent pedophile. She was bisexual, and she actively lobbied for the removal of any laws forbidding relations between adults and children. So you can see where her heart was at. She was a demonic influence on the intellectuals of her day, and still is to this day. I mean, they name schools after her and programs after her. She's a famous feminist, and on and on and on. But she was a horrible, perverted person that, got fired from a teaching position for having sexual relations with underage students, right? So you can see where her heart was at. And she was a contemporary of Jean Paul-Sartre. They had relationship. They spent a lot of time together. They had an open relationship of sorts, apparently. So anyway, all this to just say that a person can have extreme talent, extreme insight, and they can be very influential, but at the end of the day, he finishes his book by proclaiming his atheism in a sort of petulant, self-absorbed, argumentative way. He reaches a point where it's kind of like, well, since I feel like nothing makes sense, I'm just going to blame it all on God, and the only way that I can get any self-satisfaction out of that is by not believing in him. It's that goes along with the petulant childlike behavior, this unthankful behavior, saying that since I can't explain everything, I'm going to blame it on God, and the way that I'm going to express it is by not believing in him. You know what I mean? And it comes across in his comments, especially right near the end of the book, where he declares his atheism, right? He says, I was taught Bible history, the gospel, and the catechism without being given the means of believing. The result was a disorder which became my private order. Then he goes on. He had difficulty between Protestantism and Catholicism. He wasn't able to resolve them. He says that he gave up on God, but kept believing in the Holy Ghost for a while, and then he gave up on everything. Even the very last page of the book. He says, I depend only on those who depend only on God. He's trying to be clever, right? And I do not believe in God. Try and sort this out. You know, it's very smarmy. It's very self-satisfied. Personally, I cannot. I sometimes wonder if I'm not playing at loser takes all, and if I am doing my best to trample on my hopes of other days so that everything will be rendered to me 100-fold. He talks in circles and doesn't make, and ends up not making any sense at all. His final sentence says, if I put away salvation among the stage properties as impossible, what is left? He calls salvation just a stage property. A whole man made of all men, worth all of them, and any one of them worth him. So he talks in circles, and it ends up becoming like a fuzzy dream of self-introspection. It's a very depressing read. It's filled with frustration and, you know, self-absorbed confusion, really, is what it is. And some of his quotes are rather insightful, but it remains that his indignant attitude towards life, his total lack of thankfulness for the position that he was born into, it leaves a very bad impression of him as a human being. And so this is the first book that I've read by him, because I never had the opportunity to really study existentialism at any length at all. I mean, I've read a little bit about him from his biography and a little bit about Simone de Beauvoir. But these types of philosophies, which are atheistic philosophies, continue to today, and he continues to be influential today. And it is this unthankful attitude that leads himself and probably many others to this form of atheism, which is a type of entitled refusal to acknowledge their creator. In spite of all the observations they make around them, they sum it up as a complete absurdity, and they refuse to acknowledge God. And so what ends up happening is their heart becomes darkened, and their outlook turns only towards anything that makes them feel good, or, you know, gives them any kind of fleshly satisfaction, if you want to call it that. And they can find no place in their heart for value in charity. When they see an injustice, they merely write it off as being absurd and meaningless. You know, there's a lot of that in the writings of Solomon, in fact. You know, meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. This would be a quote in line with existential thought. You know, they say that the only meaning that you can get out of life is the meaning you give it. There is no meaning from the perspective of a divine creator being in control and summing everything up in a just and proper way, given a long enough timeline. Anyway, I'm sorry to go on so long. I'll try and shorten this video up by taking out the dead air space and move on. But not a book I would recommend. Very depressing, very lacking in any redemptive qualities, unless you really want to get inside of the mind of somebody that was exposed to literature and reading and writing at a very early age and pursuing it his whole life. Otherwise, a book that is depressing and very discouraging as far as the outlook upon life. So no wonder I'm a little bit down after finishing this book. So hopefully I'll move on to something with a more positive spin to it. And until then, God bless you. I love you very much. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and that you find something better than Jean Paul-Sartre to read. Take care of yourself. We'll talk to you soon, okay? Bye-bye.